Good luck! You'll need it! Yeah! Contestant 1. Contestant 1. Contestant 1. Money! Big prizes! I love it! Bingo! Woo! one. No way!
I guess the really interesting thing in Robotron and Smash TV is you are confined to a single screen. And really in Robotron it was the easy thing to do with the technology at the time, and it turned out kind of interesting. In Smash TV we actually chose that, the dynamic there, because the cool thing of that dynamic is it's a confinement. It's a sense of being trapped and surrounded with no escape. And that was kind of really the cool thing in Smash TV is you're sitting
seeing
there,
your whole world.
You see everything out there that you have to kill, and then they're just converging on you from all sides, and you just have this feeling of entrapment and this collapse upon you, and you have to somehow flee, work with the flow, somehow just blast your way through this mass and get out, and that dynamic, is really a lot of fun, and once if you opened it up and allowed the game to scroll in any direction, if you allowed, a bigger play field, then it becomes, you kind of lose that dynamic, because you can always just keep running. And here you must stand and fight, and it's the coolest thing is you think you're dead. I mean, there's so many times when you can take your hands off the controls. You go, oh man, I'm dead, and like you're not dead. You go, whoa, it's like you keep killing, keep fighting away, and like you somehow come out of it and you go, man, I
can't believe I survived.
How to survive,
Yeah, that's the key to all these the successful games, is that tight situations that you somehow escape from. Back in those days, if you'd finish a game, like the Atari VCS games, if you finished the game, well, you'd stop playing it. So, I think it's important to always put in some dramatic finale that's very difficult to attain. And so, when we put the keys out there, and unfortunately what would happen is people got so good at the game, they'd go through and they'd clear out the waves more quickly than we had anticipated. So the random icons that come out, and one of them is a random key, the key would come out, it wouldn't come out as often, because they were so good at the game. So they would get all the way through the game, not have enough keys to get into the pleasure domes, have to go back and do it again.
If you look at the Robotron and the Smash TV style of games, if you look at the amount of enemies that you deal with on a per second basis, how many kills per second, I don't think it's ever been exceeded or even come close to by any other game.
Right.
The amount of
carnage.
action, the amount
pure
of carnage
and
action that you have to deal with, and it's amazing how you really have to have this mindset of, you kind of have this global strategy of, don't get too near the wall, don't get trapped in the corner.
Right.
But then you always have to have this free, you have to be always kind of free in your mind to kind of take what the game gives you. Mm-hmm. You can't have like a predetermined course and say, okay, I'm going to go over here and get
different
this.
every time.
Yeah.
It's different every time. Things appear randomly. Yeah. I remember complaining to the sound guy, the sound person on the game, that I couldn't hear, this guy exploding over in the corner, Mutoid Man. Not Mutoid Man, Mr. Shrapnel. Yeah. And he like threw up his arms. He said, are you crazy? You're throwing off 30 explosions a second. It's like, how do you expect to hear Mr. Shrapnel explode when, you're shooting 10 bullets a second and there's all these explosions happening, and there's gunfire, bah, 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 and You know, he's right. I mean, you sit back and listen to the game, it's like, wow, it is non-stop explosions. The first boss monster we did for Smash TV was Mutoid Man. And I remember, you know, John just went into his office, and you know, he came back the next day, and he had these sketches of this guy in a tank, and actually wanted the guy floating a little bit at first.
Yeah.
Wanted him kind of flying around, and I was fearful of, you know, how I'd make a big thing float and fly around. So I said, well, what about a tank tread, you know?
Right.
And so that's kind of how we got into the business with Smash TV. The interesting thing about Smash TV is that you know, it's very violent. You know, the body chunks go flying in the air. You know, the pools of blood that come out of the boss monsters. The boss monsters losing arms and screaming, and you know, of course, a couple of years after Mortal Kombat came, and there was the hoopla about violence in video games.
Actually, when we first got that going, I mean, we just watched that for days.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
just the blood pouring out of his neck.
Right.
I mean, it was like...
Well, I remember Eugene, you know, one of the cool things about these early hardware platforms, for me, I had come from doing, you know, the Atari VCS games where the entire game was 4K. It would only take maybe 6 weeks to do these games, but very limited horsepower. And when I got to Midway, Williams at the time, and the hardware that these guys had developed, you know, sat in my office. I mean, the number of objects I could toss out and balls bouncing around, I mean, I was just overwhelmed by it. So when it came time to turn on, you know, some body parts or some chunks, I mean, just turn on 2 of them. Well, that looks cool. Turn on 5 of them. Well, that looks cooler. I remember Eugene, the first time he saw the blood coming out of the boss monster, he said, "That's $50 a week."
My favorite gratuitous piece of violence in Smash TV is the eyeball.
Oh yeah.
When you step on that landmine, this incredibly, I mean, it's a total 3D rotation, coming in your face, animation of an eyeball.
Yeah, sometimes more than one.
Yeah, sometimes more than one. And I mean, John, I still can't believe it, but John drew that by hand, pixel by pixel, from his head. Nothing was rendered. Nothing was, and it's growing in 3D, coming at your face. I mean, it's a total 3D effect.
We're talking about doing a Smash TV sequel. I mean, you know, John came up with the idea of, okay, this game show and, you know, these people competing, and it really still applies to today's marketplace, which is competitive head-to-head activity, you know, in some kind of a creative world. You know, I would love to do another dual joystick game. You know, I mean, that would be so cool. And that's a great concept. Actually, there weren't a lot of waves. You know, that was, you know, doing a wave-based game. I remember coming in, and, you know, Eugene was thinking, well, I don't know, with, you know, today's marketplace, you can get away with kind of a wave-based game. In fact, we argued about the free man icon. You know, of course, the games at that time had started to transition over to buying in as you go. You know, there had been some games prior that had, you know, allowed buy-ins. Tempest, I think, maybe was the first game that allowed that. But so Eugene and I argued because he thought, wow, you know, this, you know, I don't know if you should give away a free man. I mean, you know, we're buying in, let him continue, and, you know, let him go, and which, you know, so we have ended up giving away free men based on score, and you could pick up the icon. But you know, we were a little concerned about a wave-based game, and, you know, of course, boss monsters would come in, and that kind of brought it, you know, into the current day. But
yeah, it was. Yeah, I think, you know, by adapting it to a buy-in format, and there's always, you know, there's always that chemistry between, you know, how far can you screw the player, and how much can you give the player, and how much can you screw him in.
Right.
And you're trying to get money out of the player, you know, and so that there's that conflict there, and
Sure.
I think so I think with the buy-in, and the other big thing was the boss monster format. So basically,
taking your money, yeah.
Yeah.
I could do Smash TV from start to finish on 1 quarter. you know, which wasn't easy. I mean, to go through that game on just, you know, one start without any continues, I mean, you have to really, you know, be playing right, especially on the snakes. I mean, the snake boss monster was the last boss monster to go into the game, and I mean, it's difficult. I mean, you have to lob the bombs at the heads, and you know, keep shooting them, and they're coming down, they're dropping stuff on you. So you know, that's the toughest part of the game. But I don't know, you know, good play mechanics can live forever. There was a movie called Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger that must have come out around '88, something like that. That kind of formed some of the, you know, the elements of Smash TV as well. Of course, you know, we had two people out there competing just amongst themselves. It wasn't like the movie where, you know, they're prisoners and it's a death match.
Yeah, and we took it. I think we took it into the height of absurdity. You know, that was kind of the coolness of Smash TV was it took this, you know, people are like dying and killing each other, you know, for like toasters.
Right,
you know,
right. It's a futuristic game show. I mean, in fact, that says the year is 1999, right? The #1 rated TV show is Smash TV.
That's right.
Right.
And it's like the game, you know, the game host and
he was real campy.
Yeah, just kind of like, he was kind of inspired by like some of the RoboCop stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah, RoboCop was big then.
You know, and just kind of, it took this whole kind of satirical, comical edge on this whole thing.
Right.
That just,
I'd buy that for $1.
Yeah.
And stuff, right?
My contribution was this. I did 100% of the software. Brian and Sharon came up with the original idea of Rampage as far as it's like, what can we do as far as scrolling a background, using background animation as abilities. They came up with the original idea, and then we got together on stuff, and we went from a 2-player monster breaking up the world to 3. It was, a lot of it was to do with, we were going to make you the biggest, baddest character on the screen and have all the good guys being the little people that you were destroying. It was a game of letting you do the destruction.
And you be the bad guy for a change.
Be the bad guy and have fun at it.
Rampage was inspired, oddly enough, not by the subject matter as much as it was by a limitation of the hardware. Bally sent us to a trade show. We got to see what was going on out in the industry, and some nifty things were happening out there. And one of the things myself and one of the other artists, Sharon Perry, centered on was, look at all this background scrolling, background animation, because the video games, sprite-based games were, at that time, just a foreground sprite, what's called a sprite element, and then the background. And our games didn't have any background animation, so we went back and say, hey, can't we do this? And we were told, no, we can't do this. So we went into a room. Well, first we said, why can't we? Well, our background is based on block boundaries. Everything's in rectangles, so we can't move that stuff, and we can't move big portions of it. We only had a limited amount of art, so the limitations, we went into a room and said, okay, what could we do that is moving in rectangles? And in the same conversation, in 5 minutes, a building smashing into itself is moving a small area of the screen in a rectangular form, and that actually said, okay, then it's monsters. It's, you know, knocking down a city. This is going to be a riot. Rampage was fun. Rampage was one of these things that broke a lot of ground in a lot of different ways. We managed to squeeze an extra player on the cabinet, and that let the game at the time earn the distinction of being the highest earning game ever. So they wanted to do, once it took off, they wanted, a lot of the trade magazines wanted to do covers and stuff like that. So we actually we mocked up a scene wherein got a dollhouse and busted a wall out of it and put some furniture in there, and I made a little styrofoam head, and this was pushing through the wall, so it was the cover of a magazine. With this, because the rub with Rampage was you're destroying all these cities. There's 768 levels in the original game, and like 125 different cities. We actually, unbeknownst to management at the time, we sent out press releases to all the cities all over the world, telling them that their town was about to be destroyed by 3 giant creatures. And amazingly, over 50 papers around the world picked up on it. And I mean, front page articles telling them that, you know, you too can destroy Peoria for 25 cents. This was, the peripheral stuff is as much fun, for me anyway. The stuff like this makes the industry fun, makes it fresh, makes every game fresh. The names for the characters were more just, you know, because they sounded funny. There was nothing about Lizzie, obviously, is a lizard, but and George sounded like what a big ape would sound like, and Ralph was almost an onomatopoeia. Is that right? Is it onomatopoeia? Anyway, George is almost an onomatopoeia for, you know, a dog or a wolf growling. So the names just sprung up in conversation. They seemed natural. You've got a certain amount of time to do a game. We've got to be done with this in so long. There's a million things you always want to do, and you come to the point where you've only got so much time left. So the feedback becomes real important. If people see that, yeah, I can punch this subway train and it goes back the other way, somebody stumbles onto the fact that, well, if you let me punch it again instead of destroying it, we've got a game within a game here. So it's accidental. Based on feedback, you enhance it. Instead of making it 2 hits to destroy it, well, let's make it 10 so they can knock it back and forth. Once the monsters shrunk, obviously they weren't wearing clothes when they were monsters. They'd have to be nude down there. So I did a little nude picture of men and women covering their private parts, such as they were. And actually we had a fair amount of backlash over that. Here we've got something with that, you know, her hips are only 3 pixels wide, so I defy you to point anything out if you could find it, but we actually got some, you can't do that. These people, once they found out they were nude, there was a backlash, but it was more just, you know, talk. It didn't hurt us in any way.
The reason why we made it a 3-player game was simply we had 4 characters in the game, 4 cars, 4 drones, so to speak. If one player played the game by himself, obviously that was a shoot-in. You could have 3 computer-controlled cars, and that's how you could control the pace of the race through those drones, as we call them. 2 players was fine, even 3 players was fine. You always had that 4th player or 4th character to control the pace of the game. But we had a dilemma. And we were in a game design meeting with the management. If 4 players were playing the game, how in the world were we going to pace the game? We had no computer drone at that point. Cause
we had no, you didn't have a clock running down.
We had no clock, and so then we had, yeah, sorry.
And the other thing was trying to come up with a cabinet where you had the ability to, the key with sprints were the fact that you'd learn the angle of the approach and you'd speed of your car, and you'd throw the wheel so that you'd slide around. And that was what Sprint was all about. So trying to get 4 players with enough room with a steering wheel so they could all view one monitor was...
Then they'd all be like spinning wheels,
right,
smacking each other.
Which was really tough. So it was like, okay, 3 players is really good still. It's way more than 1.
The real reason, yeah, when it finally was decided to be a 3-player game was simply because we had no way of knowing from a game design standpoint how to pace a 4-player game because there wasn't a clock in the game. And so magically we just said, oh, don't make it a 4-player game, make it a 3-player game. We have the 4th drone. So here's our clock.
Why didn't you put a clock in?
Well, we talked about it and we didn't want to. That would change the whole game design. We wanted the coin drop to be governed by pure competitiveness, racing against other players. If you win the race, you continue on without paying. If you lose the race, you pay. And so that was It just followed on the coattails of the success of Gauntlet, being multiplayer. A lot of discussion given to coin drop and how we can maximize that in the game. I can think back to my Super Sprint development system, and it was, multi-layers of boards, wires running everywhere. It only worked if I had a coffee cup, a styrofoam coffee cup that I'd wedged in between the first two boards, because if they were any closer, too much heat was being generated.
Dave Weavenson Memorial Coffee Cup.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly, it was a technician on the project, Dave Weavenson. He made it all happen. There were other technicians as well, but the development systems back then weren't as elegant as they are now. They were homemade. In Super Sprint, we tried to add a little bit of perspective to the tracks over and above what had been done previously on the top-down views, and that is some of the turns on the tracks were banked. We tried to represent that graphically, and we also represented that algorithmically in the driving algorithms, where if you went over a banked, curved portion of the track, you had more traction as opposed to more than you did on the straightaway. So we tried to give it a little bit of a 3D feel, but it was purely 2D. And it was, I guess, a couple of years there, it was the last of the 2D type. There was nothing realistic about the driving algorithm in Super Sprint, but that's what made it fun and challenging. Is the older game, Sprint from the late 70s, used elements of the free spinning wheel as opposed to one that locks, and we wanted even to enhance that further, so we changed the driving algorithm. It's drastically different than the original to emphasize the fact that you can spin the wheel, and that became the art of the game, learning how, as I think Mike mentioned it earlier, learning how to spin that wheel right when you're coming into a turn, and then catch the wheel as you're coming out of the turn as a way to play the game.
That's a lot of the fun of the game.
That was the fun of the game.
That was the most interactive aspect of that game, just sitting there and just really spinning
Learn how
around
to spin that wheel and
slamming
spin
down
around
the
the
gas
corners.
pedal.
Grab those wrenches.
And let me make one other comment about Gauntlet, and that was we saw the benefit of maximizing coin drop by building up your character. And so well into the project, we had decided to assign different attributes to the cars, being more traction, more acceleration, higher top speed. We took all of those attributes and made them a feature in the game. And that wasn't an original part of the design to do that. We didn't have in our original document to build up your car over time. And so we introduced that into the game during the development. And that was a big part of the gameplay, the fact that in the arcades, kids could begin to play the game and begin to lose and start adding money, but over time, after they put in $2 or $3, they start to enhance the features of their car, which made them want to stay on the game even further, because they didn't want to walk away from their car, because there were 5 levels of each of these car features, 5 levels of acceleration, 5 levels of traction, 5 levels of higher top speed. And so people wanted to stay on the game so they wouldn't lose their car.
I think the big inspiration for Toobin for me when I was first thinking of the idea is it was kind of a reaction to the fighting genre of games that was going on at the time. And I saw an enormous amount of violent activity in video games at the time, and I swore to myself there must be a way to create a game that's fun to play and can earn a lot of money, but can be good, clean fun for kids to play. Well, I think it was a fun game, and a lot of people enjoyed it, but it still didn't have the appeal that the violent games had. It's just amazing. It's very difficult to come up with a concept that you would think that people would have fun playing in a sort of a strategic way, a kind of in a challenging way in terms of the control, to challenge yourself as a designer, to come up with innovative new environments and approaches, and still the kids are drawn toward these violent tendencies. Later on, I went to do Primal Rage, which was a big hit because it had a lot of blood in it. So it's a reaction to to kind of these violent games. And I thought that there was a way that we could make a game that would be good, clean fun for kids. And I think that Toobin was definitely a cult hit. There was a good, strong, following of the players that would always play it and loved it and would play it all the way through. But it didn't have the broad base appeal that some of the other games did. We built a tile editor, and we had pieces of river, of rapids, of shoreline, and the designer would sit and click through tiles one at a time and basically lay them down right in the system and build himself a level and connect all the pieces, kind of like magic squares, and you put it all together, and all of a sudden you have a level. And then you could go and you could add objects on top of that. You could add snakes or alligators or hippos and cans, and you could just pop those in the playfield at different spots and try the level on almost immediately. If you go through and you destroy each individual piece of brush or thorns that are out there in the water, eventually what will pop up is one of the letters of Toobin will come out and will float around. You can go and collect it. And so at the end of the game, you try to spell out Toobin in letters, sort of as it's kind of a game on top of a game. It's not necessary to do that, but it's.
What was the reward for that? Is there any?
Well, no, yeah, it came out and spelled it out for you. and you got a lot of money, you got a lot of points. If you go slow on Toobin, the gator would come out. And he was called the gator for a reason. It's because he was put in there to keep pushing you ahead. It was this, again, Toobin was a waiting game. And we found that what players would do is they would just sit there and wait for just the right period of time and then really try to get through the gate or to go past an obstacle. And in order to kind of prod them a little bit, we put the gator out there. And if you don't go through the gates, he'll come out and bite you and sort of prod you along and get you going. So the trick of Toobin is to take a nice pace and always go through the gates, and he will never bother you, ever. One of the novel things about Toobin is we did have a pretty decent current map, and depending on the animation of the water would actually pull you down at different rates depending upon the graphic that we were displaying underneath the character at the time too. And I don't think that kind of thing had been done previously, especially not with water, at least. But there's always been this aspect that you have a game and you have a player and you have a play field and you have obstacles or enemies in the play field, but the play field itself doesn't really interact with you. It sort of sits there. And this was kind of a new approach to have the actual play field as part of the game as well, to get the actual background doing something to the player. It was the incredible J11 chip.
Oh, yeah.
Which was a DEC-based processor, PDP-11 family chip, right? You had that chip, didn't you? And we programmed in a language called Bliss, which was anything but. And it was quite a beast.
Klax was a game which management approached us, I don't know what, in late summer, and said we needed a product for the January show in England, and could we do a game in a few months? And so, of course I said yes, and then we had to go figure out what we were going to do in 4 months. And at that time, Tetris had been popular. Ed had done a coin-op version of Tetris, and Tetris had just taken off. So this Klax was basically following on the footsteps of trying to come up with a concept that played into this whole puzzle game thing that was happening at the time. I started thinking of, I started drawing just on the paint system I had at work. I started drawing just little shapes of abstract pictures that looked like puzzle games, not without any kind of restrictions on what they should do or anything. And after, I don't know, what, a week or two of this.
Right, he'd hang it, the ones that he liked, he'd print out and hang up on his wall. So we had all these things that looked like games, a lot of simple primary shapes and a lot of very colorful things, and that was the inspiration.
And then eventually one day, I don't know why, but I came up with, well, I'm thinking about these shapes coming down, and you have to sort them and put them in piles and match colors, very much like Tetris. And I don't know, it kind of came from an idea too of, remember that Lucy show where she has to make pies and they have to hurry up, and so you had to do these operations to get this thing finished. And so it was kind of like that, and I described it to Dave. I said, I picture, I don't know, I think we just picked 5 columns for some reason. I pictured 5 different columns of stuff coming down, and then you have a paddle and you collect it, and then you could move this paddle back and forth and plop it in the pile. And then when you had 3 or more of a kind, it would go away. And you could do verticals and diagonals and horizontal lines. And
That's the game.
that was the game. And Dave went home on the weekend, I think on the Amiga, right?
Right.
And over the weekend, he did a real crude-looking just blocks and colored things. And I remember went back, there was only one Amiga here at the time, was in the video lab, and he loaded up in the video lab, and
We were able to play it after. I got a prototype going on the weekend in Amiga Basic, and we played it, and we refined it a bit. And then we had some 3D system that Mark used to generate the graphics of the tiles tumbling down, and so he generated a bunch of graphics, and then he went on vacation for about 3 weeks. And when he came back, I had got the game up and running on an escape hardware system, and people were lining up in the lab to play it. We were trying to minimize the hardware and have the least expensive hardware we could have. And the sound system at the time, we had an FM chip that did music, and we had a synthesizer chip that did digitized effects. And so we decided we could have just one of those chips to make an affordable system. So we went with the synthesizer chip. And so we could have all kinds of digital sound effects, but no music. People would work out patterns on paper, elaborate chain reactions and sub-chain reactions, and then they would patiently play the game and arrange all the tiles in that pattern and make it happen. Mark wanted a golf type sound, you know, like the little flag clapping and the sound of a golf crowd in there. So we kind of went around the halls and we got everybody we could, and we put them into the sound lab.
yeah.
And
We had everybody clap like real quietly like golf, and then everybody go, oh. And you can hear, you know, and basically those were the sounds.
That's it.
And then I did the scream, that scream, and then there was, I mean, everything was very simple and quick, and you know, there was not really, it was really.
We didn't pay for a lot of expensive voice talent.
no.
The name Klax came from the sound of the tiles. Click, clack.
Clickety-clack.
Yeah.
Klax.
Click, clack, click, clack, click, clack was the original idea for the sound of the tiles coming down, so we just shortened it from that.
It was funny, when the game went to Japan, they were concerned at the time because the drug thing was just happening, and something called crack had just come out. And they were real confused when we sent them this game called Klax, because they were concerned that it was crack that we were saying. So that little interesting anecdote there, marketing problem they had. And so we had to make sure we definitely said, you know, winners don't do drugs or something in there for the Japanese market. It was.
Is this the same people that brought us Pokemon?
Yes, Pokemon. There's cracks. Rob Rowe had worked with the 720 team, John Solowitz and Dave Rawls, those guys, to set up a skateboard half-pipe ramp in the back here.
Full scale.
One of the better ones I've ever seen.
10 foot of radius, I can build it.
Yeah, you worked
10
on it
foot
too?
of radius with like 2 to 3 feet of straight vertical at the top drop.
And they did that, and they had some of the best skateboarders in the area at the time.
We had not only the best skateboarders in the area, we had the best boarders in the world.
Yeah.
And we would
they'd be there
video.
playing around, we'd videotape them, and the purpose was, you know, kind of like Walt Disney filmed deers for Bambi. We had to film these skateboarders to understand skateboarding moves, and Will Noble, who was a fantastic animator, worked on that, and did a great job of capturing all of that. But we had a whole skateboarding ramp set up, and it became kind of like a party area, and it was really, that's right when I first started working here, and it was just incredible. You come to this place, you make video games, in the back there's a skateboarding ramp. I mean, it was beautiful.
If you can imagine a joystick that revolved on a circular basis that wouldn't return upright, sort of
It just-
in a circle, which would enable you to do the 720. If you got your speed going right, hit a curve, you could flip in the air and do this, right?
Yeah.
Do the move.